Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go. Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm up here in the Pacific Northwest, and it's the best time of the year because we have this, the sun comes out finally, and it's nice. And you're down in Louisiana?
Yeah, it's the worst time of the year. The sun's out all the time, and it's you walk outside and you just immediately sweat. It's great if you like to have a 24/7 sauna. It's good for the skin, I've been told.
Great for weight loss and general health. Yes, right.
I don't know about the weight loss piece, but I think I keep putting too many liquids back in my body. But yeah, it's beautiful today, but yeah, it's a little warm.
Well, that's good. Hey, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You have a tremendous amount of experience in sales. You've written a book called The Invisible Sale. You've done research on sales related to how people receive, process, retain information. And I want to talk to you about that. I also want to talk to you about some of the sales training that you recommend, because I'm aligned with you that I don't believe that one size fits all in terms of sales training. Different people, different organizations all have different needs. And I want to talk to you a little bit about your research and the sales training. But before we do that, if it's all right, I'd like to kind of talk about some of the unique challenges faced by small and medium businesses, or SMBs, in terms of at an organizational level, going out and create awareness in the market and selling their products and services. And then maybe at the individual level in terms of, providing kind of customized training. That was a big mouthful. So let me just throw it over to you. If we think about the SMB market, what are some of the unique challenges they have in terms of selling their products and services?
I think that the two that I've run across in my career most often is resource and resources. They don't necessarily always have the budgets to be able to afford the kind of resources big companies can, and especially in a digitally centric age. They don't always have maybe the money to have a really robust web site or robust collection of digital content that they can use during the selling process. The other big thing is and it doesn't affect all SMBs, but an SMB that is smaller but trying to cover a very large region, regional, national. So you've got a relatively small sales team trying to cover a really large region. And let's face it, this, when you're sitting behind the windshield or sitting on an airplane, you can do some selling, you can be somewhat productive, but not nearly as productive as when you're sitting across the table from somebody, or sitting even, nowadays across, a Zoom meeting. So I think that is a huge challenge for them is, how do they harness technology to be able to scale, really network at scale and be super efficient.
So, and I'm sure that's a huge issue, both in terms of budget to afford those resources, but then also just to have the in-house expertise. If you go to work for an enterprise, they'll have not just a marketing team, they'll have a HubSpot expert, right? And the person has done HubSpot, implementations or deployments in 3 of his previous roles, right? So, the deep subject matter expertise. SMBs, they don't have that, both in terms of the funding or that in-house expertise. So if we focus on the digital kind of resources and that challenge there, how do you advise SMBs to kind of work around that?
The approach I usually take with them is let's look at what you need. Let's look at what, from a digital perspective, you can afford, and you might not be able to afford a HubSpot. It's not it's not Marketo expensive, but it isn't cheap either. It's an investment, and but there are things you can do with lower price CRM tools like Nimble I recommend that to a lot to SMBs because it's a killer CRM tool, great mobile app, etc. It can do a lot of the things a HubSpot can do. It can't track your website, which is the beauty of like a HubSpot, is that you can see people on your site and you can get a lot of invisible buying signals and so forth. Okay. So you don't have that, but at least you have a killer CRM. You have email sequences. You have all these other tools that a HubSpot gives you. You have some basic open and click tracking on your emails, etc. let's start there. Let's walk before we run. And by, helping them figure out those first steps they can take, they can hopefully grow their sales to the maybe one day they can upgrade to a HubSpot or something, of that nature, a little bit bigger. And so I find it's just really a lot of times they don't even know what they don't know. They don't know what's available, or they don't know how inexpensively they could set up. I can set up every salesperson's desk so that they've got almost like a mini studio to enhance their ability to deliver really high end. This is not just Zoom or Teams calls, but presenting virtually, and show them how to do it. And when you show them, it's like, oh, well, that's not that expensive.
Right.
No, it's not. But they just don't know, and they don't have time to go do the research to find out.
Well, and the landscape for sales enablement tools is growing so quickly. And, you have things like Seamless AI and Zoom Info and Kong, I don't know how you pronounce it, and these other tools. Maybe can you talk a little bit about, because you said, you could create this studio of tools, or like a dashboard for salespeople in an SMB. What are some of the must-haves? And you don't have to give specific company names, product names, but in terms of, okay, we already talked on, you need a CRM, but what are some of these other tools that are just kind of a must-have these days?
Well, I think the CRM's the main thing. I think some sort of sales activity tracking system, and ideally even a sales activity scheduling system. So ideally, you would want the ability that when a new prospect or lead is put into the system, that you could automatically schedule the first, let's say, year of touches against that prospect or lead. To me, that is, it goes hand in hand with CRM. Some CRMs can do it, some can't. Something like that. And then, obviously a reporting so you can stay on top of the team to make sure that they're doing it. I think those are minimum. I think you have to have, again, if you're doing a lot of like this, where you're over Zooms and team calls, I think you have to have really high end cameras and good microphones so that you get a really good presence. I think you have to standardize on, you need to standardize on some video platform that's going to be your platform of choice. I think the other thing is you have to have, I think a website's a mandatory, and not just a website, but a website that is literally like a massive FAQ. You have to have a repository of really good content. I don't know if you ever heard, there's a gentleman named Marcus Sheridan. It has a great philosophy. They ask, you answer. And he's a big HubSpot guy, great guy. And I love his philosophy because it's such a concise yes. And but you need that. You need to have a repository where a salesperson can quickly find the answer to every question that's ever been asked about the product or service, and not just the answer, but the most perfectly crafted answer, the one that should absolutely move the prospect down the pipeline or over the hurdle. Because what's really interesting about that is, and I've tested this over the last 15, 20 years, if somebody asks me a question and I give them an answer, their BS filter is about a 7 out of 1 to 10, with 10 being, I don't believe anything you're saying, 1 being, I believe every word out of your mouth. Most people, when I take them through this study, this research, they'll come in at around a 7. But if I give them a piece of content that answers it, and I say, hey, our marketing people or somebody wrote this, I think it's the perfect answer, can I send it to you? They'll read that answer and their filter will be down around a 3.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's completely illogical. I mean, if I'm sending you something, it's probably going to be the most perfect answer. It's going to be the most biased answer.
It's like when you go to a car dealer and the salesperson there can tell you, hey, this Bronco is way better than a Jeep. And you're like, yeah, whatever, dude. You just want to sell a car. But then they pull out something from Consumer Reports or, Car and Driver, and it compares the two cars and it shows that the Bronco's better than the Jeep. And you're like, oh, well, this looks legit. Honey, let's get the Bronco.
Yeah, and it works. That's great because it's consumer report, but it even works when it's your own company's content.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason why is that mentally you assume because the content predated your question. It existed
Right.
before you asked the question. How could he have possibly known I was going to ask that exact question? Well, he didn't, but you're the 100th person this year that's asked it. That's why the content's there. It's why somebody built it. But it is illogical, but it happens. It works. And so I think that's a big thing. You have to have the ability to build that content. You have to have the ability to store it and then very quickly be able to find it and use it and share it. Because again, so much of sales nowadays is becoming like this. It's over video. I don't know about you, but I see it even with my own clients. Here in New Orleans locally, though, we'll schedule a meeting and they'll say, oh, just send me a link to Zoom, or, hey, I'll send you a Teams invite. And they're literally 2 minutes down the road.
Yeah.
But they're
it's interesting because I've trained sales teams all around the world. And my number one rule, or one of my number one rules, I have several of them, but one of them is get the meeting. Because until you get the meeting, until you have a face-to-face conversation with somebody, you're just like a piece of paper and a stack of resumes, right? I mean, you're not going to stand out at all. So it was always get the meeting. And then COVID came along and messed up that whole thing, right? And but even this is better. This virtual meeting is better than not having a real conversation. And it's weird. Like, do you think people? Because I feel like, if you have a face-to-face meeting, you can accelerate the trust building process and that relationship development. Do you think that we have adapted now and this virtual meetings, they're okay to do that?
I don't think we've adapted. I think some people have adapted fairly well, but I don't think we have, because just managing a virtual meeting is so completely different. Just building trust and empathy and all the things that, like you said, you can do face to face because you can pick up on so many signals. But I love your philosophy because even in a world where this is acceptable, I agree with you. You still want to push for a face to face, because to me, the beauty of a face to face, especially if I was in their offices, in their building or whatever, is it as long as you walked in with big ears and big eyes, you got to see a lot of things that were clues, right? That you could, and I remember I was doing some workshops for Toyota dealers, not Toyota cars, Toyota forklifts and stuff. And one of the head distributor guys said, we want our people to get in there. We want them in the warehouses with big ears and big eyes, so they can see other types of forklifts or other types of machinery or issues that we know we can solve. But but the person either doesn't tell you, doesn't think to tell you, doesn't know you solved that. But your salesperson can see that. And all of a sudden now you've got a second, third, or fourth type of opportunity that you can push down the line. But yeah, a lot of times this unfortunately is becoming more the norm. But again, that's just where people, we've got to continue to. The biggest people who haven't adapted is if people are being forced to present a sales deck, any type of sales that requires deck presentation type things. We've not adapted to that. They're still using that same presentation deck that, it might work in the boardroom, but it doesn't work in the Zoom room. They're not and mainly because I don't think they know they need to, or they don't know how to rebuild them for enhanced presentations through virtual presentations. But they'll get there eventually because this, unfortunately, I just don't think this is going anywhere.
So I totally agree with you. Whenever possible, get in there, because it's not just the relationship. You can see so much more and pick up on those clues. And it's funny that you bring up like the traditional presentation, because when I started in sales, the whole thing was you'd go in, ask a couple discovery questions, and then do a presentation. And the presentation in B2B scenarios was typically like this. This is a problem that everybody in the industry is facing. And if you don't solve this problem, you're going to have all this downside, right? But if you do solve it, here's what you could have. And here's what our solution is. Oh, and by the way, our company was founded in 1980 and you know, and you have all these.
You got to have the client slide. Got to have the slide with all the logos on it.
Yeah. and then part of the thing that changed that is when people started bringing, in my opinion, started bringing their devices into meetings. And if you don't keep them engaged, they flip open that device and start checking emails and stuff like that, give you kind of like, and you know, and so you can't go in there with 30, 40 slides and do that anymore. So what's your workaround for a scenario like that? Because you do want to convey some information, right? But how do you work through that?
Well, the way we do it is I've spent the last probably, I guess, 7 or 8 years now. It actually started, a client asked us to do this for them. I've spent the last 7 or 8 years really diving into the research around how people process information and retain it. And what we've learned what the science says is that when you walk in to do that presentation, they're going to forget 90% of what you presented within 2 days. And, you know, part of that's biological. But a lot of it's just design and how people are building presentations, how they're delivering the presentations. So we've spent our time trying to understand the science behind, you know, how do people process and ultimately retain information, and then we apply that science. I was just doing it yesterday. We were doing a workshop with a client yesterday, and it really comes down to they're not going to remember everything. So you've got to figure out what's the core, what's the elevator speech for the presentation, so to speak.
What do you want them to remember when you walk out of there and a week later they say, "Hey, how was that meeting with Tom?" And they're like, "You know what? He told me this, this, and this."
And that's usually it's 4, no more than 5 key ideas, points, whatever. It might be one idea or one solution with 3 or 4 support points, whatever the case might be. But yeah, so it's doing that, but then it's rebuilding your deck so that you're strategically repeating that information. Roughly about 30% of your slides should be this repetitive slide, because that's what drives it home. That's what pounds home. But unfortunately, I think people get caught up. Like I said, we were doing this workshop yesterday, and one of the participants goes, "Oh, well, our competitor has a super awesome video that's part of their slide because they use Digideck and it's this fancy presentation tool. And, we're just, using a PowerPoint." And I was like, "All right, what was the video about?" And they're like, "Oh, it was all about how awesome, their destination is," because this was a DMO. And I was like, "All right, the whole presentation is about how awesome the destination is. That's what they're trying to do, is get the meeting planner to book a meeting there. What was the sales message?" I said, what was the presenter saying? Like, while this little video thing he's playing in the background looking so cool, he's like, "I don't remember." I'm like, "Yeah, exactly."
It's funny you mentioned videos, because when somebody turns on a video in a sales or business meeting, for me, I feel like, oh God, this is like you're going into pure sales mode, because whatever's on that video it's just not personalized at all. This is your mass marketing message that you're just going to try to kind of program me with. And I find it a turnoff, because there's another reason. If I'm having you watch a video, I'm not talking and you're not talking. It's just, we're all looking at the screen, and I don't even need to be there to do that. I could have sent you a link to the video, but that's my little,
and you're stuck. Let's say it's a 60-second video, 90-second video, and you're standing there looking at the client or the prospect, and you can see, like, this is not hitting. They're not digging this. You're stuck. Unless you're smart enough to unless you're confident enough to go, "Well, that's pretty good. You guys can watch the rest of that later. And you jump back in," which most don't. And so now you just have 60, 90 seconds of dead space. You've lost any type of momentum.
Totally agree with you. And I'm sure you've seen this, where they can't get the damn video to work. It's just like, because, if you're doing it virtually and then they've got the video queued up over here and it's like not working, or they can see it, but they can't hear it. And I'm like, why would you do this, man?
Well, and this guy was talking about, they had the video like embedded. And so it's playing in the background, like on the screen while the presenter's talking. And and I'm like, man, you don't understand. Like, you're now competing with your slide deck for attention.
Yeah, you shouldn't be.
And most presenters are going to lose, because that video is, $100,000 of high-end production specifically designed to capture and hold attention. by people who do nothing but do that all day long, you're probably going to lose that battle more often than not. And it was funny because once we kind of walked through it, the guy was like, yeah, you're right. We probably should just stick with good old fashioned PowerPoint. I said, yeah, you should stick with good old fashioned PowerPoint and just be a better presenter.
There's the old adage, you should tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that kind of reinforces the message. But why don't you talk about some best practices going through slide by slide in terms of, I've just presented a slide with 5 bullet points on it. I could just go on to the next slide, or do you have any techniques to kind of help summarize or kind of, get that, encoded in your audience's brain?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing, I think the biggest failure that we tend to see with presentations is the slide is what do we call? I call it a show up and throw up slide. So the slide shows up and it just throws all the information up on the screen at the same time. And if there's 4 or 5 bullet points or whatever, it all comes up. And then because the presenter's he or she is using it kind of like a script. Really, that's kind of what they're doing. They're kind of cheating. And that's really the biggest mistake people make. And the reason it's such a mistake is that there's a part of your brain called the Wernicke area. That's where, when I'm speaking, that's the part of your brain that translates the audio into, oh, those are words and those words mean what they mean. That same part of your brain does that for anything that you read. And it can't do it. It can't process both at the same time. And so it tries to pop back and forth and multitask, which it doesn't do very well. And so that's the biggest mistake. Because what happens is, if you've probably done this, maybe you're on your phone, you're reading an email or something, and your coworker or your spouse, whatever, starts talking to you. And after like a minute, you look up and you're like, huh, what? And they get mad at you because you're not listening. Yeah, because you're not listening. The truth is, you were listening, but because the Wernicke area couldn't process your wife's voice words and the written words you were reading simultaneously, you didn't hear it. And you probably didn't remember much of what you were reading either, because your brain's jumping back and forth trying to do it. And that is like the single biggest, if salespeople would stop doing that alone would significantly improve their efficiency, effectiveness, and persuasiveness as presenters, because they would find that alone would help their audience remember more of what they're saying. The other big thing is just really sitting down and if I'm going to go give a presentation, I'm going to work really hard to know what you think today. Where's your brain today? And then I know where I want you at the end of the presentation in terms of what I want you to believe or think or feel. And that gap, that's my talk track, is that gap. And what story do I got to tell you? What data or information do I have to tell you? In how should I format it? In what sequence should I tell it to you so that it makes sense to you? It comes to you in a framework that makes it really easy to connect all the dots. And instead, you'll see salespeople show up and they'll just throw all the information. Every slide's basically as important as the one before or after. Every point's, there's no hierarchy of information. They have made no attempt to organize it for you in a way that, oh, okay, I get it. We're talking about A, B, and C. And then here's more details on you. If they would just do that, you would find your presentations are a lot more effective. I think you'd find people pay more attention too, because what happens is if you're trying to work as the audience to make sense and connect all the dots yourself, it creates what's called cognitive load. And a high cognitive load means you're using all your brain power to understand, which means you have no brain power left over to actually remember. And so, when we work with clients, we try to help them flip that script. So they're not using a lot of brain power to understand, which means they've got way more brain power left to encode and put that into the mental hard drive, which then produces better memory, retention, which is super important nowadays, because let's face it, you seldom walk in and make a presentation and walk out with a decision. It goes to a buying committee or they review, everybody gets around, talks about it, 4 or 5 days later, especially if you're in a multi-company pitch for something. So if you can't get them to remember what you said, chances are you're not going to win.
No, I think you bring up a really good point, because a lot of times what I'll look at is, okay, obviously part of the discovery process, you'd ask, so who else is involved in this decision, or who are the other stakeholders? Who else do we need to get on board with this? And they'll say, oh, well, definitely need to, get the CFO ready for that. So part of my job now is to prep you to go and convince your CFO that this is a good investment of resources, right? And so when you walk out of there, if you forget everything that I've told you, you're not going to be able to close that deal with the CFO. But if I kind of help you retain the key points, and also understanding that the CFO is going to want to look at numbers probably versus maybe your HR team or somebody else, another stakeholder. So that's really important. What about like when you're presenting, stopping the presentation or stopping on a slide and asking questions? It takes a little bit of confidence, but do you advise doing that?
I always like, when I give presentations, I always tell, look, if you have a question as I'm moving through this, just ask, because a question asked and answered, in context is usually a better, it's just better for everybody.
Yeah.
It also, too, there are some people that if they have a question or if they don't understand something, they almost can't consume the rest of the presentation, because they're still trying to solve whatever it is they didn't understand or couldn't figure out or make sense of, and it almost puts like a mental block. They really can't go with the rest of the presentation. So I think it's, you're better off making sure. Hell, you can even I'll do, where as I finish a section, I'll even stop and say, so did all that make sense? Is that everybody's with me? We're all tracking. And I also encourage people, look, ask the question, because if you have it, I guarantee someone else in the room has it, but just nobody wants to be the one to ask. So please ask. Don't wait till the end. I agree, though. A lot of salespeople get worried by that. It throws them off. It just kind of throws them off, because especially if they're trying to memorize their pitch instead of just knowing their pitch, which are two different things in my mind. But again, I think it's a more effective. It's a more effective approach. And you might learn something that you go, oh, I'm going to go off. I'm literally going to go off script, because that question, either we haven't addressed this, or that question tells me that there's something going on that I missed during my learning phase. And if I don't address it, all the other stuff I'm going to tell them isn't going to be any good, or maybe even be irrelevant. So better to figure it out and be able to pivot, mid-presentation if necessary.
Totally agree with you. And I like to keep it as interactive as possible. You got to get through your slides, but that's not your objective, really. Your objective is to connect with the audience. And like what you said, is to help them remember what the key points are, that even 2 or 3 days later, sometimes I'll, after a slide or two, would say, so Tom, are you seeing something similar to this, or have you experienced anything like this, or how does your organization deal with these challenges? Again, and you're collecting information, you're getting useful information that could help you kind of close the deal later. What are some other techniques to help people kind of retain that information?
Man, we could sit here all day about going on through these.
Well, I learned about the Wernicke complex, and I'm going to try that next time my wife asks me, and I'm going to be like, honey, it's not me, it's the Wernicke. It's not functioning. So
I'm just going to tell you, she's going to call BS on it. Mine does.
I know.
See, even though I've handed the research,
is going to be all the way in the red.
I even have handed her the research studies that, because it's named after the German scientist who discovered it. And I still get, you're just not listening. But no, that strategic repetition, saliency is another thing where your brain is designed and it's hardwired to pay attention to that which is different. So, for instance, if you're presenting charts and graphs, anything statistical or chart or graph, if you look at, you create a chart in, like, let's say, PowerPoint. It makes a pretty chart. All the colors are really similar. It puts it in a nice color palette and puts, a legend and all that. Usually you're only talking about one piece of data on that chart. That chart's supporting a key point. So one of the things you want to do is the salient point. You want to find a way to highlight that salient point, whether that's using a color, whether that's, doing, there's lots of different ways to do it. but you really want to highlight like, hey, look, this is the point of this chart or this slide. Everything else is contextual data to help you maybe consume or make sense of the point. But really just dialing in and using that saliency. Motion and animation can do the same thing, because otherwise, again, they're working really hard to understand it and try to figure out what you're saying. They're trying to process all this data that's on there. So saliency is probably the other big one that people should focus on.
I'm so glad you said that about charts, because it's so hard for me, and it just makes me feel stupid when somebody puts up a chart or a graph, and I'm trying to figure out what am I looking at here? How is this? What's important? And it does make me feel stupid, and now it's never good to make your customer feel stupid, right? Mm-hmm. But also I'm not getting your key point. So if you can summarize it and say, hey, what we're looking at here is this general trend, or what you can see this is in 1999, there was this anomaly or whatever it is, but please interpret it for me, man.
Yeah, again, I think you see, if you ever watch like researchers present, if you ever watch like research studies being presented, I mean, they believe their job is just to tell you everything they learned during this research study or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not. I mean, yes, that's what I want to know, but no, it's not. What I really want to know is, what does it mean? Everything that you learned. What does it mean? What does it mean for my company? What does it mean for what I should or should not do moving forward? Just tell them that. If they want all of the deep detail, great. It's there. It's on the slide, or put it in an appendix. Also, appendixes, make use of appendixes. I think that's the other big thing people don't do. Like you said, you're talking to somebody and they're going to have to pitch it to their CFO. Put all the numbers the CFO needs in the appendix, and all that kind of heavy detail. Put that in the back. And when you present, tell people, say, look, some of you may want X, Y, or Z. I have all that. It's in the back. Or don't say anything. Just present and let them ask the question. And if someone says, if CFO says, well, how's this going to pro forma out on a 5-year running or blah, 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 blah. And you can say, well, actually, I have that detailed. If you'd like, I can jump to that. We have a slide at the end that's in our appendix here. Would you like me to go there now? And sometimes they'll say, oh, no, it's okay. I don't want to break up the whole thing. Just, you got it though? I do. Yeah. I'll point it out to you when I'm finished. Or if it's really important, they'll say, yeah, actually, can you go that? And now you know two things. Two things happen. One, ooh, this is really important. This is probably a decision variable. Right. It's not just, this is going to be maybe a make or break your thing. But the second thing it does is it really makes you look like you have, that you're buttoned up.
Totally.
Because, and I've watched people do this that have taken our advice and done this. And, a client will do, and this works prospect or client. And they'll say, oh, well, what about such and such? Oh, well, I have that on slide 20. Oh, well, let's go there. Okay, come back. Oh, I have, later the next one. Oh, I have that, slide 57. After like 2 or 3 of those, they stop asking those questions.
Yeah.
Because they're like, he probably has it. And so it just improves your credibility and trustworthiness and all of that, which again, just the more trustworthy, the more credible you are, the more persuasive you will be. It's just a natural functioning of the two variables coming together.
I agree with all that, and that's again, you're trying to develop credibility and trust, and part of that equation is just showing that you're prepared and that you're knowledgeable, and that also that you can bring some value to the table. Because if you demonstrate that you have that kind of that knowledge, you're not just some person who randomly walked into this role. You are a subject matter expert, and I find that prospects or customers, they really like it when you can help maybe educate them or help them understand more what the market's looking like, or what some of the solutions look like. So totally agree with you on all that. Let me ask you, we jump over to the sales training now. Let me back up. You said, oh, I got it on slide 20, or I have the answer. If somebody asks you for something and you don't have the answer prepared, or maybe you don't know it off the top of your head, how do you respond then?
I don't know. And that's response. That's not that I don't know how I'd respond. The response is, that's a great question. I don't have that in this deck, or I don't know. But that's a good question. If you'll give me 24 hours, I will get back to the office and find out for you. Hopefully you're not saying, I don't know, like you didn't anticipate the question or but it's okay not to have anticipated every question they might have. So by just saying, no, that's a good question. I didn't anticipate that would be something important to you. I don't have that in this deck, but if you'll give me 24 hours, I'll get back to the office. I'll pull it and I'll send it over to you, and I'll copy everybody so everybody can have it. Move on. Worst thing you can do is try to BS your way through the answer, I think.
We're totally aligned there as well, man. I think we're all human beings, and we all want to be the subject matter expert. But sometimes you just say, hey, that's a really good question. Haven't heard that before, but I like it. Is it okay if I write it down and get back to you within? I'd like the 24 hours thing too, because another thing, when you create a time bound commitment to somebody, and then you reach that or meet that commitment, you're also developing trust. They're like, oh, Mark said he was going to do that, and then he did it. Okay, give him the trust meter goes one number to the left or right.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
It takes confidence to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I've never understood why people are so scared to admit a lack of knowledge or a lack of anticipation of a question, because to me, it's like one of the most confident things you can say in a presentation, because you're basically admitting, I guess you're not really admitting failure, but maybe people perceive it that way. And as a prospect or a client, if somebody looks at me and goes, either I don't know the answer, no one's ever asked me that, or any of the things you were talking about, I'm like, all right, cool. That's somebody who's confident in their abilities. They're trustworthy. And then if they do, like you said, they follow up and they get it within the timeline or ahead. Okay, great. You just put another check in the trust box. And that's the thing, that's the other thing about presentation. I think people don't realize is that every presentation is actually two presentations. There's the first presentation is the prospect deciding whether or not you're worthy of being listened to. Are you trustworthy? Are you credible? And credibility is huge. Everybody always talks about, you do business with who you know, like, and trust. That's 75% true. It's who you know, like, trust, and find credible. I know, like, and trust my mom immensely. I love the woman. I would never take her recommendations on, SaaS software. She's not credible. She doesn't know anything about SaaS software. Even if a SaaS software company hired her, I could very quickly figure out she doesn't know anything about SaaS software. She's not credible. And I think, that's the thing.
You're going to get a phone call after this podcast, though, man. After that, you're going to get a phone call from mom. What do you mean?
I've used that one before. She knows. No, I used to laugh when she would, when the book came out, her and my dad went on this like massive trip throughout Southeast Asia, and they kept taking pictures with the book everywhere they were at. Awesome. And they were putting them on social media and everything. And I even joke all the time that people say, is the book any good? I'm like, hey, my mom said it's the best book she's ever read. She doesn't know anything about it. So she's used to it. My mom's used to being used as a foil. But but the truth is that that's the thing. People forget, like, the first presentation is you actually gaining permission to be persuasive.
Right.
To have the authority to tell a company how they should make, a multi-thousand, or in some cases, multi-million-dollar decision. Right. Mm-hmm. The second presentation is the actual presentation. And that's the one we all think about, work on, practice. But so many people forget about the first one. And they just assume because they are a salesperson for a certain company, or because they have a certain title, that the client and prospect is going to consider them credible and worthy of being listened to. And to me, it's just a huge mistake. It's a bad assumption to make.
I agree with you. And I mean, to me, it even goes back to like showing up on time, making yourself presentable, even just things like a handshake, eye contact, it conveys confidence, building rapport. These are all kind of sort of soft skills, but they're really important. So. And that's why I said earlier that the sales is such a broad area, because it can go into so many different areas. We can talk about the tools, we can talk about the techniques, we can hard skills, soft skills, all that. So amazing subject. Let's talk about training now. So, we talked earlier about one size doesn't fit all. Tell a little bit about your approach in terms of if you're going to go in and provide training to an SMB, maybe they've got 15 salespeople. How do you figure out how to do that?
Well, obviously, you do a lot of exploration and discovery with not just the directors of sales, but the salespeople themselves. Like a lot of times we'll put everybody through a simple survey just to gauge both where the management team thinks everybody is and where the team thinks they are in terms of skill sets, et cetera. But the other thing too is what I find is every sales force I've ever looked at in 30 years, you can put salespeople in one of four buckets. They're either in the buckets are like the type of salesperson that they just naturally default to being. And the first bucket is a vending machine. They're basically just order takers. They're really not comfortable or not able to do anything to influence either A, the decision to buy, or B, what to buy. Classic vending machine. I see a lot of that. They're really good at just taking orders. And so if you're the market leader, great, they can be great salespeople. And you see those a lot, like in distribution or commodity sales. You see a lot of that kind of stuff. The second is a grocery store. Again, not really necessarily doing much to stimulate a buy, but can stimulate what to buy. But it tends to be based on relationship. These are those great relationship salespeople. They can, their customers love them, and they can go to the customer and say, "Hey, we got a new product coming out. Can you do me a favor and buy, whatever, a case or whatever the initial order." And so what you'll see is like the sales of new products will go like this, and then they'll flatten, and then they'll drop, and it's because they can't get that repeat because they've already leaned in the relationship. Or there'll be a website, and a website tends to be more information-driven sales. They're much better at sort of tactical sales, using content, using logic, really making great arguments, making great presentations. They're also, one of the key characteristics is that makes somebody a website is, like a good website, they are absolutely just like dogs with a bone when it comes to growing cart. Like every time you ever buy something on the web, what's the first thing the website does? Tries to get you to buy something else, right?
Another recommendation. I
Right.
can't check out, man. There's too much good stuff here.
Yeah. And so website salespeople will do that. They're really good at like growing cart and getting people to buy more of a client's products and services. And then at the top of the food chain are florists. And those are your true trusted advisors. They're great at building relationships, really knowledgeable, really well trusted. And where you have a florist, and the reason I call them florists is when you think about when you buy like roses, when you buy roses through a florist, it's really one of the few things in the world that you ever buy sight unseen. You just assume something nice is going to show up. That's a huge trust. So anytime you've got a salesperson that is really good at just, the client will buy things because they trust the salesperson is leading them down the right direction. They don't really push back a lot. They don't ask for a ton of backup and support. They just really allow that person to guide them. When you look at a sales force, you can usually classify every salesperson in one of those four buckets. And then, then we'll sit down and say, okay, based on that, what should the individualized training? Because if you've got a couple of florists, they may not need much training other than maybe some technical proficiency. Hey, they're a florist, but they don't know how to use the CRM, or they don't use a CRM, or they don't know how to use Zoom very well. So it's very technical oriented. If it's, a grocery store, it might be, okay, they need to learn how to use information and build arguments and, improve their presentations because they're not really good at maybe making that argument to buy. So they don't have to lean into the relationship so much. Vending machines, you've just got to figure out whether or not you're going to fire them.
Well,
are they trainable?
Yeah, but in some industries, with some products or services, maybe that's all you want. Is a vending machine, right?
It can be, like I said, if you're the industry leader, it can be great. I used to do a lot of work in the liquor space, and as long as we were working with one of the big brands of the company, where it was, an order taker was all you really needed. But when the company was trying to launch challenger or smaller brands using that same sales network, and those brands really suffered, and some of them ended up kind of dying on the vine because they did have a lot of vending machines, and those folks just that's not going to happen. They're not going to help you launch that smaller product. So you're either going to have to pummel the market with lots of marketing spend to pull it through the market, or it's going to wither on the vine. But a lot of times, even that, it's just helping a client. A lot of times, it's that training might be, well, before you worry about training that person, you have to first figure out, are they trainable? Right. And if they aren't, then maybe it's time to get rid of them. And if they are, then okay, what do they need? Can we move them up to a grocery store? Can we teach them relationship building skills? Can we teach them how to develop loyalty and trust and credibility, so that at least they can lean into relationships to help them sell, and that they can actually want to sell and influence the buying decisions? So that's how we approach it. And when you customize it like that and you put people in groups, I just think what you're doing is you're getting a more efficient ROI out of your training spend, because everybody's getting exactly what they need versus just everybody gets the same thing. And so as a person being trained, you're sitting through something, you're like, I know all of this. I don't need this. You check out. And maybe you check back in when it's covering stuff you really do need. Maybe you don't. So I think it just creates a lot more efficiency.
Makes a lot of sense. And I really like it, because I've delivered one-on-one training, small group training, and then training to large groups. And for me, they all have their unique challenges, but the one that I feel probably least fulfilled as the person who's delivering the training is the large groups, because it's kind of a cookie cutter approach. Hey guys, and that half the people in the audience already get this lesson, this lesson, this lesson. So it can be challenging. And what I try to do in those scenarios is make it as interactive as possible, so that people who do know can play the role of the mentors to the people who don't know, and we can model things. But that's challenging, especially if you're doing it remotely or virtually. It's so challenging.
I had to do, we have like a half a day business development workshop that we do. And to save money, the company wanted us to do it virtually for them, so that they didn't have to either pay me to travel or pay their people to travel. And it was so hard. It's just, training is just so, unless it's one-on-one, I can do my one-on-one coaching with clients over video, no problem. It's fine. But man, when you're doing any type of workshop, I don't know about you and what you've found in your training, but I have just found that I feel like I'm so much more effective if I'm in the same room.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing is when you're doing it remotely, you're also competing with their phones and their wives and whatever else. And it's like
the second screen. Hell yeah. There's a second screen open, literally.
Oh,
yeah. And something's on it.
LinkedIn, the stock market, the sports, ESPN, whatever it is.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, know it. But again, that's why you have to, if you are ever selling things remotely, that's why you have to present very differently. You have to use different tools, different cadences, different approaches, because you're battling that second screen. Because let's face it, we all have it. I've got 3 right here in front of me. You're on one. I've got my main computer monitor, and my laptop monitor's over here. I could be watching the Paris Olympics right now if I had it on.
You're making me feel not very important there, Tom.
No, you're very important. You're on the main one that I'm actually looking at. One.
Okay.
You're the main
one.
Thank
goodness, man. Thank goodness.
Yeah. But like I'm saying, like if I was, if this was a sales presentation and I was getting bored with what you were saying, I could have my email or something right below camera, and I could, you would probably figure out eventually that I'm looking at it. Maybe if you, but it's just, I've always felt face-to-face was the best. You can get a better vibe. You can kind of see and feel, is this person getting it? Are they not getting it? Or are they getting it, but they're buying it or not buying it? And you can see, like I said, yesterday we were doing this training and I was talking to the client at the break and I'm like, so what are you thinking? I mean, your people better than I do. He's like, everybody's in. There's 2 or 3 that are kind of, they're not right there with you yet. I'm like, is it the 2 or 3 you would have expected to not be with me? And he goes, yep, exactly. I was like, okay, good. If it's the 3 you expected to be tough sells and not really jumping headlong into this, that's good. That means things are going well this morning. But you wouldn't be able to pick that up in a virtual environment. It's just too hard.
Yeah. Let me ask you, what advice would you give for people who are trying to hire salespeople? What do you look for in a sales candidate to demonstrate or to show you that, you know what, this person will probably do a good job?
The number one trait I look for is curiosity. Are they truly a curious person? Not that they can ask questions or will, but are they truly curious about getting the answer, not just as an ends to a means, but they just legit enjoy learning about other people, about other people's situations, about how they might be able to solve something. That curiosity, all the greatest salespeople I've ever met are just, they're curious by nature. The second thing I look for is, do they follow through? I mean, do they do what they say they're going to do? Or if they tell you you're going to have it in 24 hours, you have it in 24 hours. Other thing is critical thinking. I try to challenge people's critical thinking skills, and because at the end of the day, a lot of times that is what sales is. It's listening to a client. I stole this from one of the very first interviews I ever did coming out of college. I was interviewing an ad agency, and it was the second round of interviews. And I thought it was going to be just, hey, do we like this kid? And if so, we're going to hire him. And I get in this, and this guy looks at me, he says, all right, he goes, so you're Mercedes-Benz and blah, 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 blah. And there's this new company, Lexus, and they're doing X, Y, Z, and they're stealing market share. What do you do? What's your marketing plan? And I'm like, oh, okay. And, and so I spouted off what I said, well, this is what I would do, and here's why I would do it. And it was really funny because after I got hired, I asked the guy, I was like, dude, that was kind of I'm not going to use the word I use, but that was not a nice question. I was a little, and he goes, but here's the thing. He goes, I really didn't care if you got it right or wrong. I just wanted to see how you'd build your argument. Could you build a rational argument, whether I agreed with you or not? Could I see how you got where you are? And so that's what I'll do. I'll ask some sort of a question like that. And again, I don't really care if they get it right or wrong. I just want to see, can you build me on the fly a logical, rational? Can you connect dots in a way that makes sense, even if I disagree? Because I don't know if you've seen this, but I find that's one of the most lacking skills these days. We are, I guess it's our education system. We're putting out people who are really good at regurgitating information that's been told to them in the proper format, but we're not necessarily turning out people that are really good at just being able to take this, think about it, and then solve it, or at least quasi solve it in the moment. So you give me a curious person that can think.
That opens up a whole nother can of worms, because it's something that I'm really passionate about. But if we look at our education system and how we're raising our kids these days, there's actually a great book called The Coddling of the American Mind. It talks about how we take the kids and we protect them from any kind of adversity, and we control all their free time by all these organized activities, instead of them just going out to play with their friends and negotiating, hey, what do you guys want to do? Why should we do it? And in doing these, in dealing with like conflict internally. But then they go off to university, and you have safe spaces, and you're not allowed to actually openly debate controversial issues, which was what university was actually originally part of the charter.
That was why you went
to learn these critical skills and kind of push back on the quote unquote doctrine of the day. And so then you get out there and congratulations, you've got a job, you got a degree, now go get a job. And you get a job, and they're like, okay, so we want you to take care of this. And they're like, but yeah. So no, I mean, we could literally talk hours for this, because I think it's massively important. And let me just ramble on for one more second, because I have three boys. And, when we talk about the importance of specific skills. So for example, whether it's accounting or, computer programming, for example, versus general skills, which would be like, reasoning, persuasion, the ability to communicate in an effective manner. And I say, those hard skills are really, really important. Some of those jobs, coding, could be replaced by AI in a few years. We don't know. But the ability to go and actually communicate with people and be persuasive and kind of critically think through problems, That's not going to be replaced. Neither is your plumber.
Mm.
But so, I mean, it's hugely important.
Well, I've always said the ability to sell and persuade other people is a superpower that guarantees you will always be employed. Somebody somewhere is always going to need something sold, and not everybody can sell. So if you can do it, but it's interesting you're saying about the education system is that the other big thing is, and this is when I'm looking at really like younger, 22 to say 29, 28, entry level is, can I get them to call me back on the phone? Because you'll reach out to them and they'll text you back or they'll email you back. You said earlier, can they look me in the eye and shake my hand?
Yeah.
And have a conversation face to face with me? And do they pull their phone out? That's my first thing. If you come into an interview with me and your phone's out, you better be really impressive. And if you, God forbid, you look at it. If you look at it, oh man, it's not going to be a good day.
And that could be some. It maybe doesn't fit into the. So you've planted the seeds in me. The vending machine, the grocery store, the website, or the florist. That's just a general skill that goes across all 4 levels. Where that I think you can teach, and it's probably it's to some degree generational. I mean, people my age are guilty of it sometimes as well, but very generational. And people need to understand that when if you pull out your phone in the middle of a conversation, even take a look at it, what messages are you sending the person that you're talking to?
I think it's Simon Sinek has this great YouTube video. He's on stage giving some talk, and he says, "Hand me my phone," and he talks about how just the fact that you bring the phone into the environment of a conversation, you don't have to look at it. It doesn't even have to be on. The fact that it's in your hand, it changes the vibe, and it changes because like I said, like I tell, when we do our training, I tell people, look, if you're at a meeting with someone and their phone is on the table, your hurdle just got higher. And I said, if the screen's facing down, you got half a chance. If the screen's facing up, you better be super compelling, because the screen's facing up for a reason. They're worried, it's the FOMO thing. But like a simple trick we teach all the time is when I go into a meeting, I will make a point of taking my phone out of my jacket or pocket or whatever I'm wearing, and turning and saying, "Give me a second, I want to turn this off," so that like my family, they're on the emergency. So even if I have it in silent mode, if my kid calls, it's going to ring, and I don't want to be disturbed while we're having our meeting. And I'll make a big deal about putting that off and putting it away in my bag. And I do it for 2 reasons. One is to tell them, you are the most important for the next 30, 45 hour, whatever. You are the single most important thing in my life, which is like the sexiest thing you can do in the world to anybody. Because nobody gives you their undivided attention anymore, right? And so when someone does, it makes you kind of sit up a little taller. Oh, okay, they're into me. Cool. But the second thing does is it primes them to go, maybe they should turn theirs off. He did it. Maybe I should do it too. And I've actually watched people do it. People who I've watched them in other meetings and they don't do it. But just that simple priming technique. And if you can get that phone out of the room, especially if it's a group presentation, you get all those phones out of the room. I just think you've already elevated your ability to persuade
and help them retain because they're paying attention.
Absolutely. I have a love-hate relationship with phones. I mean, I love the technology. I remember when it first came out, I had a BlackBerry and I was a solopreneur, and I was so excited that I could be in 2 places at once because it just made my life so much easier. And now fast forward, 20 years or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like a freaking digital leash. I hate it. I wish I could throw it away. But so, I think, like I said, curiosity, critical thinking, good communication skills, do they look you in the eye when they shake your hand? Do they maintain eye contact? Do they put their phone away? Like just sort of some of those etiquette skills. Like to me, that package right there, I can work with that. I can round the edges. I can teach the skills, but those are those sort of intangible things that I can't train that into you.
Well, you can create awareness though in the person and say, hey, this is what I'm perceiving. I remember coaching somebody, and the part of the coaching process was that I went on a sales call. I actually went on like 3 or 4 different sales calls with the person, and he'd have a habit of he wore a suit, and back in the day when people would wear ties, and but he'd have a habit of when he'd meet somebody, if we were standing, he'd put his hands in his pocket and kind of lean against the wall. And this is like an initial meeting, right? We're not all friends here, right? So I just took him aside after like the second meeting, and I say, here, I'm gonna show you what you're doing, and you tell me how you feel. And he goes, I do that, and he goes, you're right, I do. I never even thought about it, but it just looks like I'm a sloth and I don't care, right? And I was like, yeah, that's it. And then he changed. But so it wasn't, and sometimes when you're talking about people's personal behaviors, it can be painful, but I say, hey, you got to put your body armor on. I'm going to just tell you what I see. I might be wrong, but let me just, kind of model this out for you. And that awareness sometimes helps. Sometimes people push back. They're like, no, I'm not going to change.
Yeah, and you're right. I like how you positioned it. You're not trying. You're coming from a place of caring. You're trying to help the individual be better. You're not trying to just pick on them and tell them that you're bad. You're just saying, I think you could be more effective if you stop putting your hands in your pockets and leaning against the wall. That's probably not a great look. So I tell you, that's going to be the thing. I think in the next, if I look forward in the next 5 to 10 years, I think that interpersonal skill and that awareness and that ability to really handle oneself in a physical environment with prospects and clients, that might be one of the big game changer skills that separates the superstars from the average salespeople, because we do have this whole generation coming through that for many of them, that's not a strong suit because they've grown up looking at phones and iPads.
Text.
And
I don't have kids, but the kids are like these days, they get them. Okay, so you got me beat. I got 3, but it was funny. Like, as soon as they got to their teens, we'd go like to soccer game in the back of the car, right? Or practice, kids in the back of the car. And they're not talking. And I look back there and they got their phones out, and I say, hey guys, sorry, I say my son's name, his dad, I'm kind of militant about this. You got to put your phones away. And they're like, what? And I'm like, no phones in this car, man. Yeah. And guess what? They start talking. But it's just like, what do you want to teach your kids? You want to teach them how to like be a slave to this? Mine's not, by the way, this is just the case. So don't get your feelings hurt, Tom. So, but or do you want to teach them to be able to communicate and, have fun and, because what's more enriching? But I think there's a lot of concern. People are tough. We're getting into another topic, but I think a lot of parents are concerned about being too tough with their kids or whatever. But come on, man, being a parent's not easy.
And it's interesting because I have 4, and the oldest to youngest, the gap's 10 years. So my oldest came into that like 13, 14, the teenage years, right on the early, like there was no iPhone. There was, the little old fashioned phones that had numbers on them that you could text.
Phones
yeah. And so she kind of came through all of that. She was, probably high school or college, once like, you started really having social media and all that stuff. Whereas my youngest, he's 16 right now. So, I mean, he has grown up in that world of digital screens.
Snapchat, TikTok.
Yeah, everything. I mean, he's had it all. Yeah. And it's real. And then my other 2 are in between. And so it's been really interesting for me, not just as a parent, but just, as a salesperson, as a, somebody who's
as a researcher, you're doing more research.
Your kids are super curious about stuff. It's been really interesting for me to watch how they have adopted technology or not adopted technology, and how it's how it's influenced how they use that technology today and so forth, and just what their relationship to that technology is. And it's just really, it's been very interesting. And we've been fortunate that my 3 boys all went to this middle school here in New Orleans. It was an all boys school. And I loved it because like the first day we took them, my son walks in and the principal, meets him, and my son goes, hey, or whatever.
Hey.
And the guy looks at him and he goes, no. And this is they were militant about this. They would make sure every boy in that school knew how to properly shake your hand, look you in the eye, and they would constantly reinforce it. They would walk up to the boys and be like, "How you doing?" And they would, "How you doing today, D?" And if you didn't look them in the eye and shake a hand and give a nice solid shake, you got a little bit of a fussing at. And but it's great because it's such a little thing. And maybe you've experienced this, like when you do properly look at someone and shake their hand, how many times does somebody ever say, "Oh, that's a good shake"?
Yeah.
Usually the person's like 45 or older, maybe 50 or older, but like people notice it and it's different. And so, I think the next 10 years is gonna be super interesting to watch.
I actually did a mini workshop on handshakes. Because there's ways to do it, there's not ways to do it, right? And you don't want to do should be a firm grip. You don't want to break somebody's wrist or hand. You never want to pull them in too close or twist their arm, because like some people shake and they pull, and it kind of, can make you feel awkward. So but if somebody shows you when you're young, it like you said, it's something that you can use over and over again, and it makes a good impression.
Yeah.
At least in our old school way of thinking. I don't know about these days, but I don't know.
Well, at least for the next few years, we'll be okay. And, until the next generation fully takes over the world. But by then, we'll both be sitting on golf courses someplace. We won't care.
Hopefully so. Hey, Tom, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm pretty sure we could continue for another hour or two talking about sales and, the kids these days and whatever. But hey, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Fast podcast. And if you're up in the Seattle, Pacific Northwest area, let me know.
I will absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm always flattered when anybody wants to listen to what I have to say. So, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been fun. We obviously have a lot of similar thoughts about the world.
Awesome. You take care. Cheers.
You too.